For midpoint formula, you're just finding the average between the x values and the average between the y values. So if we look at number 1, if I'm finding the average x1 and x2 and x2, so I'm going to add those together. So 1 plus 7 divided by 2. And then if I find the average of the y values, 5 plus 2 divided by 2. So you end up getting 8 over 2, which would be 4. And 7 over 2, you have an odd number, so I'm just going to leave that as 7 over 2. You don't need to write it as a decimal or anything like that. And then distance formula, you can think of it kind of like the Pythagorean theorem as well, because you're just trying to find the distance between those 2 points. It's like finding the hypotenuse in a sense. So if you want to go by the formula, then you would say x2 minus x1. So I'm going to take the square root of 7 minus 1 squared plus y2 minus y1. So 2 minus 5 squared. Even though you get a negative number, once you square it, it becomes positive. And so you have the square root of 7 minus 1 is 6. 6 squared is 36. Plus 2 minus 5 is a negative 3. Negative 3 squared is 9. So I get the square root of 45. But in this unit, since we know how to simplify radicals, we're going to leave it in its simplest form. And so if you just type that in the calculator, you'd get some sort of decimal. But I want us to leave it in the radical form, like the simplest form. So that means in square root of 45, I want to pull out any perfect squares. So are there any perfect squares inside 45? 9. So if I pull out a 9, if I have the square root of 9 times 5, when I pull a 9 out, it becomes a what on the outside? So I want you to try number 2. And then you can do it on the whiteboard and then hold it up. Okay, so you should get midpoint is at 2, 7 over 2. And then distance is the square root of 145. All right, so for completing the square, the first step that you want to do is you want to pull out the greatest common factor. That is like if your a value is not 1. So on all of these examples, the a value is 1. But you might want to make a note out to the side. You want to pull out greatest common factor first. And so when you pull out the greatest common factor, you want your a value to equal 1. Because you can't complete the square unless your a value is equal to 1. Then my second step, I always look at the middle term. So in this case, this positive 10. And out to the side, I write out 3 things. My b value is 10. I'm going to half my b value. That would be 5. Then I'm going to square my b value. So b over 2 squared is 25. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a perfect square out of this x squared plus 10x. So I'm thinking like what value is going to create a perfect square. So the second thing that I do is I move constant to the right side. So I would write this as x squared plus 10x plus blank negative 21 plus blank. And so what I put inside the blanks is the b over 2 squared. So I'm going to add 25 to each side. The reason why I add 25 to each side is because my third step, so I add the b over 2 squared. Then I'm going to factor the left side, so factor the left. When I factor the left side, what adds to 10 and multiplies to 25? 5 and 5. right? Positive 5, positive 5. So I'm going to factor this and rewrite this as x plus 5 squared equals, and then on the right side I have a negative 21 and a positive 25 becomes 4. And then the last step, step number 5, is I move the constant back and I put it in standard form. So just move the 4 back to the other side and I put in standard form. So basically just setting it equal to 0. So my final answer would be x plus 5 squared minus 4 equals 0.
So what's the difference between doing like, why don't we do?
Okay, so for this one, pull out a greatest common factor. There is not one, so I'm going to move the constant to the right side. And so I would write this as y squared minus 20y plus blank equals 75 plus blank. Then I look at my middle term, which is the negative 20. Come over here. B over 2 is negative 10. And b over 2 squared is 100. So I'm going to add 100 to each side. And then if I were to factor the left, it would be y minus 10 squared, because it adds to negative 20, multiplies to get 100, equals, then 75 plus 100 is 175. Last step is I move the 175 over to the left. So y minus 10 squared minus 175 equals 0. Should be your final answer.